I just finished my journal. It was 6 months, so I've just shifted to a new notebook, but I needed to put something on it to really mark the transition. I put the sticker that you gave me that says, "Am I the drama?"
You should take a photo of that and tag Cardi B. It's so really funny because it's just the frog like with his arms open. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Twitting with Anna and Ida. I'm one of your co-hosts, Anna V. Escamani.
And I'm Ida V. Escamani.
And we're really thrilled to welcome you back. We're grateful to everyone who keeps listening. This is officially episode 11, so we're keeping a good, steady pace. And
11 more than I thought we'd ever do.
I know, but it's great. It's great. And we have a lot to talk about as it was a very busy week in Florida politics. I think, Ida, the topic that everyone's been talking about across the world. In fact, I actually had a meeting with folks from the Japanese consulate in Miami that came up to Orlando. And they even brought up to me the special election results, saying that it was in Japanese news. It was pretty cool.
That's wild.
I know.
I had friends from all over the country messaging me about it.
Yeah,
that's
it's
amazing.
great. So let's unpack it. So for those who are not as, don't have the capacity like we do to take in all this political news, this week on Tuesday, there were special elections across Florida for empty seats, right? So these were seats that became available for special elections because Governor Ron DeSantis had appointed those elected officials to other positions of power. So, for example, in the context of the South Florida Mar-a-Lago seat, the representative, Mike Caruso, became the clerk of courts for Palm Beach County because of DeSantis' appointment. In the context of the Tampa Bay Senate seat, this was Jay Collins' seat. So you might not know that name because he's not a really strong candidate, but he is running.
I gotta tell you, I am deep in right-wing Twitter, and this is good for a different pod, but the girls are fighting in that governor's race.
But yeah, so Jay Collins is one of the handful of Republicans running for governor, and he was the lieutenant governor for DeSantis before he ran for governor. But anyways, that's why these seats became available. For context, for those who don't know why we have special elections, right? And so with that said, historic wins for Democrats in a state that we don't always get to say that. And so, Ida, let me just toss, over to you some thoughts.
So we have Emily Gregory, who defeated John Maples and flipped this seat to blue, as you noted. And this is, of course, the district representing Mar-a-Lago. And so this race made a lot of international headlines because the idea that, Trump's massive resort mansion and tragically headquarter of some of the most important decisions made across the world is now represented by a Democrat, Emily Gregory. And I was actually just listening to an interview she did on WFSU just about her race and a lot of the things that she ran on. And so much of it, of course, was her opponent made everything about just nationalizing issues and about loyalty to Donald Trump. And she really stuck to the issues that people are demanding from their government, addressing the affordability crisis, talking about just the things that, everyday communities need. And she's has a lot of deep roots in the community. And I think this race in particular shocked the world just because of the dynamics around Mar-a-Lago being the district.
Well, I just think that people want accountability and they're not getting that from Trump. And also remember, not having an incumbent in any of these seats helps, right? That's why there's a special election. And Emily Gregory in particular ran a really strong race. I donate to her campaign. We were helping to boost her campaign from Orlando to South Florida. Some members of the Democratic caucus went down and knocked on doors with her. She raised a lot of money from across the country. So I wasn't as surprised about that outcome because I think that there were just a lot of important elements that were getting checked, if you will. You have a race with a lot of national attention, which helps bring in national money, a really strong candidate that's message discipline, that's sticking to the goals and the needs of the local community, not getting caught up in the national news, if you will, but still benefiting from the national news because you have money coming into the district to help. Strong team around her. In fact, some Planned Parenthood folks who had retired from Planned Parenthood, but were helping her So she just had really great staff around her and guidance, and she did the work. She knocked on doors. I mean, that's so important to be on the ground in the district. And I think her personal story and background and profession really strong for the district as well. All those factors for me created a sense of confidence in that race. I felt really, really good about that race. I'll tell you what was surprising to me was the state senate race. This seat in District 14 over in the Hillsborough area did not get as much media attention at all. Nathan, who ran for this seat, is a really strong union guy, really committed to uplifting the working class. We all know the affordability crisis is what's top of mind for folks. And so he really championed that. And this race was tight. I mean, this was a race that we were watching to the last minute. And he was running against a really, really strong incumbent Republican from the Florida House. So again, it was an empty seat, but the Republicans had nominated a candidate that has a really strong track record in Tallahassee, strong fundraising, strong family background, and he won by 400 votes. And so, this is a race I think is going to be a lot harder for us to keep, but it's really important for us to do everything we can to keep it. But it does speak to a shifting tide. It speaks to also the fact that Democrats have gotten really good at special elections because we've been able to really activate our base when it's needed most. Of course, our challenge is not just activating our base during a general election, but also persuading new voters to join us. And what was also really exciting to me about these outcomes that maybe was a little bit more surprising was the NPA turnout in both races. Looks like no party affiliation voter has really supported the Democratic candidates. That's a strong indication for the future.
I read some reports that Brian Nathan was outspent anywhere from 7 to 10 times over in this race. And so against a lot of odds, and I think it's a piece to the testament of the hard work, to your point, just hitting the pavement and knocking on doors and talking to people and meeting folks where they're at. But then also, this current economic crisis that so many people are in right now is by design. The economy as it is very much to the benefit of the very few at the cost for the many. And that reality is something you cannot deny. And the Republican Party is never going to have any real solutions because their economic agenda relies on widening the gap from the have-nots. And that's why they scapegoat, right? They blame immigrants, they blame Black folks, they blame women, they blame LGBTQ people for the economic crisis that we're all facing. And so when you have candidates that are really doing the hard work and offering actual real solutions and accountability, it can really make a difference, not just to your point, the base, but also these NPAs. And I think when folks look at this around like hope for the general, to your point, I mean, there are some things special elections bring that the general election does not, in the sense of national attention. It's easier, there's only a couple candidates, but you look at the state voter registration numbers, it's still a tough place for Democrats in the sense of there is 1.5 million more Republicans registered to vote in the state than Democrats, but there are over 3 million independent voters that can really be the key if there's a really dynamic candidate and also just a really strong grassroots race. So much money gets lost in sort of the top-down consultants and TV and all the noise, the mail. I also saw some commentary just about how much mail was in some of these races and how that turned people off. If you're just out there talking to people and getting to know them and listening and then, responding accordingly, right, to the things that people expect from their government.
Well, I'll say a few thoughts to what you've said, right? So you're right that special elections are case studies. I don't always know if they're indicators. I think it's
Right.
really important for those that are listening. Obviously, we should be excited, but this is not a permission slip to be passive and to be like, oh, the tides are turning. We're good to go. Like, this is going to be great. Like,
Because
no.
nothing happens by it's not just a tide too. It's not by accident. Like it's really
Right.
hard work, of course.
It is. And what always concerns me about today's politics is that, most folks, they just see the outcome. They don't see the process. And so they see the outcome and they're really excited about it, but they do not participate in the process. They don't know what the process entailed. And so a lot of assumptions get made how to get to the outcome. And we just described a lot of the process to everyone, right? Like money was required. Now, again, money is not the end all be all to winning. You just talked about Ida, how Brian Nathan was outspent, but he did have to have some money, right? To buy materials, to potentially if you're not gonna have the ability to pay canvassers, at least buy food and water for canvassers, right? So resources is important. That's a piece of this. But also a strong candidate with a strong platform, but then the resources to communicate that platform, because you can be a first time candidate with the best ideas, but if no one knows who you are and no one doesn't hear your ideas, they will never know the best. So communication dollars helps with that too. And these were candidates that, ran operations, Emma Gregory in particular, where she was able to combat the misinformation and communicate to a larger audience and win by a pretty large threshold. That's going to give her a good safety net, if you will, when she has to run again in November. And that's something else too, is because these are special elections, these folks are going to be back on the ballot in just a few months. This is the time to like tap into the work, right? And I also want to just, if I may, Ida, you mentioned excellent points about like Republicans not really being able to fix the economy because they don't have a solution, and their solution really is just widen the haves and have-nots and continuing to cater to special interests.
Because to them, there's not a problem. Like, it's working exactly how it's meant to be worked.
Right. Right. And I just want to provide, like, if I may, a little bit of an addendum to that, because like I do think when I talk to folks every day, there is a distinction between like MAGA and Republican, like for a lot of everyday voters. I mean, I do think the Republican Party has been taken over by MAGA. And so like, from the outside in, I don't see a difference these days. But to give a little bit of empathy, like for example, I've met a lot of Republicans at the No Kings protest in Orlando that were there to be anti-MAGA. And so I always want to like just provide, yeah, a little bit nuance there, because I feel like there's cracks, right? There's cracks. And we talked about that last week with the immigration, with these Republican leaders not co-signing the MAGA agenda on immigration and actually changing their minds and evolving and pulling back from the current approach. So anyways, I don't have all the
Yeah.
answers to any of this, but I'm just like, I'm kind of sitting in this dynamic because I feel like we have an opportunity here to get these crossover voters in a more pronounced way. And a lot of people who might still be Republicans today are feeling that disenchantment. And so I just wanted to kind of like put a point
Yeah.
on that.
No, I mean, you're 100% right. And I think that's the distinction between the Republican base and the Republican elite and party donors.
Right.
There's a huge distinction there. And folks will often ask me in other states too, like, how do you move Republican lawmakers? If they are not hearing from their base, I'm pissed about this issue, you need to do
Yeah,
this, they're going to
that's
listen
so
to their
true.
donors. And their donors have a very clear agenda. The donor class wants to create a system that can keep making money off government, whether that be through wealth hoarding, tax dodging, privatization, deregulation, monopolization. This is the current practice. And if they're not hearing from their base, they have no incentive to change, because they ultimately want to stay in governing power. And the way you stay in governing power is you raise a lot of money and your voters vote for you, right? And so if they're seeing fractures in their base, then that is actually a threat, and they might actually buck their donor class, right? And honestly,
Right.
that model, there's a lot of Democrats that follow that exact model, and they count on people not to talk to them so they can just meet with the donor class and stay
Right.
secure in their seat, right? And so the fractures are so real around a lot of issues, to your point. And I spend enough time on Twitter literally just to see what the far right are talking about. And you're seeing those fractures also among
Ida's an
influencers.
online conservative lurker.
I'm a
So
lurker.
she's watching.
I love to
She's
lurk.
been she's been she's been lurking
I
all
lurk so you
over
don't.
all over conservative internet like spaces. It's wild.
I lurk so you don't have to, because there are some horrifying things being said as well that really make you, I mean, terrified, losing a lot of faith in humanity. I have to balance my life out because after 20 minutes being on right wing Twitter, I have to like go for a walk, right? But
Right.
it's really important, and there are fractures. But I think it's super important to always distinguish between the base and sort of like the party elite, so to speak, right? And the donor class of the parties. And that is part of where the tension is, both in the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. I mean, we sit in
Right.
that tension as people who fight for the working class and for creating a government that actually works for everybody, not just the wealthy elite few. Like, we sit in that tension, right? I mean, that's why we see with the Democratic Party all these fractures around, are you the hands of corporations, or are you with everyday working people, right? And so these races, I think, reflect that too, but it reflects candidates that really put cost of living and the accountability that's required to address that at the front line in their campaigns, and built a lot of grassroots support. And to your point about being outspent, it's like you need a lot of money to convince somebody to vote out of hate, or like vote out of like these bad ideas. Like I feel like our ideas are cheaper to sell because they're actually popular.
Well, talking about fractures on the right, another topic that has been in the headlines that is really important for us to uplift is congressional redistricting. And so right now, we do have a special session scheduled for April 20th centered on congressional redistricting. And to remind folks what that means and what that is, this is another effort by the Trump administration to rewrite the rules by rewriting the maps. And Florida already has congressional districts that are very uneven and sided towards one party over the other. And I voted no on these maps when they were being debated in the Florida House post US Census. And of course, there are multiple lawsuits filed against these maps. And I have been also pulled in as a witness by plaintiffs for these lawsuits. But what's really important to remember is that the act of redistricting, based on what's outlined in our Constitution, takes place every decade. And so what is being proposed right now is unprecedented. And it's a reflection of what we've seen in states like Texas, like California, and other states in the union where they are uh, uh, drawing maps for the Republican Party, which then the blue states respond back and draw maps for the Democratic Party. And you just have this like chaotic national environment, right? Where literally the congressional numbers are being shifted, not based on voting patterns, but just based on where these lines are drawn. Really problematic. The only way to prevent this, by the way, from my perspective, is congressional action. Like if a federal law was passed to say you can't gerrymander maps, that's not going to happen anytime soon. And so we have this state by state chaos. And so right now, there's a 20-8 breakdown. 20 Republicans, 8 Democrats in Florida. There are some, efforts to eliminate 5 Democratic seats, including our own Congressman Maxwell Frost. So this is really, really, really concerning. It's illegal, it's partisan, and a lawsuit has already been filed just to challenge the question of mid-decade redistricting, and to also remind everyone that this is not a topic that every Republican also agrees with. In fact, Congressman Dan Webster, who represents, parts of Central Florida, was in Tallahassee talking to lawmakers. So my understanding is that he was there to lobby against congressional redistricting, or probably at the very least to protect his seat and keep his seat as similar as possible. Because a lot of Republicans are also worried that they're going to lose their seats in this process.
Let me ask a follow-up question to that, because I was trying to explain this to somebody, and I actually thought I was like, this can't be true. But my understanding is that there's the concern is that in order to draw more Republican seats, they will actually water down current Republican congressional seats. That's the fear that members of Congress are
Well,
naming.
it's not even watered down. It's that your lines are totally changing, right? And so you might not live in your district anymore once it's new. Now, granted, most members of Congress don't care about that. They're not even required to live in their districts. Randy Fine does not live in his district, but I think the fear is that you draw a new map. I'm going to attract primary opponents that are going to be very MAGA. Because again, a lot of the Republicans that are oppositional, they got elected before MAGA, right?
They're like the neocons, not the MAGA ones.
Right. Still problematic, right? But it's a different generation. And so they remember Laura Loomer has run against Dan Webster every time.
That's a good reminder. Yeah.
He's dealt with the kind of, the Trump generation, if you will. And you change the lines, you just change the electorate for that candidate, for that member of Congress. You change what cities they might not have. Let's just say the lines change, so your biggest city is no longer your biggest city. Now it's new cities that you don't have no real personal connection with, and a new candidate runs against you who does, right? You just don't know. There's a lot of moving pieces in the map as in totality, but if you're an incumbent Republican, you are not going to like this as much as an everyday voter might think you do. And those are the untraditional allies that you need to stop this from happening. And you said this earlier, Ida, and I wanted to make a point to it about the Republican base. The only way to influence Republican lawmakers is activating the base. And I definitely agree with you on that. And it also makes me think about a stronger organizing model of everyone's always told to like call their lawmakers. And then I'll have folks who come to me and they're like, I already did that. What else can I do? It doesn't even help. And I'll tell them, I'll be like, what would be more helpful is if you phone banked into that district and called Republican voters and asked Republican voters to call their lawmaker.
That is so brilliant.
But that's more effective than you calling 10 times. I mean,
It 100
if you
times is,
you have the
yes.
capacity to still do it, but it's actually better if you can call those voters and because they probably have no idea what's going on. Like if you called like an every Republican voter and told them about, let's just say, the union busting bill or even the first, attacks on the First Amendment. Like there's all these issues that are not partisan at all. But because of the algorithms, because of where we get our news, we are just getting totally different types of information from different places.
Yep.
Dramatically so. I mean, you know this when you're doing your lurking. Like
Yeah.
it's wild. It's absolutely wild. We're
wild.
so
There's
siloed.
words and terms and stories. Like I'm just like, what is what?
We're
It's wild.
so siloed off. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
tragic. Honestly, it's tragic.
And by design, because these tech companies have an incentive to keep us divided and
Right.
fighting and all these things. Yes.
Right. Exactly. The Billy Talent speech. You dropped that Billy Talent speech. So, remind me, it was a CBC award or something? Like a music award in Canada?
It was like the Juno Humanitarian Award, which this came up on my feed. Billy Talent is a longtime punk band in Canada. One of my gateway punk bands, actually. And Anna, one of yours, I think, a band that you
Yes,
still enjoy and listen to. I
100%.
actually, the first time I ever saw Billy Talent, I was tabling at
Oh, I didn't know
Warped
you
Tour.
saw them.
Oh, they came to Orlando for Warped Tour, and I was tabling for Planned Parenthood.
That's right.
In part so I could get a free ticket to go to Warped Tour, but also to pass out condoms. And actually, there's a photo of me somewhere on the internet dressed up as a condom, like that. I have the wrapper on. With Trojan.
We must find this photo.
I looked for it because I love this photo, but I was able to pop out of tabling to go see Billy Talent. And fucking awesome, right? But I think that's the
Cool.
and I saw them before when they opened for Rise Against a few times in Orlando at House of
Okay,
Blues.
my intention was not to get you to tell us all the times you saw Billy Talent. My intention was to get you to talk about the speech they gave.
I mean,
but that's great to know. It's great to know.
well, okay. They first talked about how punk is just a community for the misfits, and also it's a place where it teaches you to give a fuck while also not giving a fuck. And
beautifully said.
As a punk, just the most beautiful thing. And then I know you brought it up. What are some of the pieces from the clip that sort of resonated?
Well,
with
what
you?
really stuck out to me.
Yeah, I know. But it wasn't me just as a condom.
We just went way off script.
Sorry.
So what stuck out to me was he said in his speech how there are political leaders who want to divide us. And obviously, he's also talking in the context of being a proud Canadian and sovereignty for Canada. But I do feel like his message resonated with people around the world in the sense of like we are stronger together. We have more in common than what sets us apart. And we can't let these forces divide us because when we are divided, that is when they exploit us. That's when they are able to maintain economic disparities and really create a society that only serves a select few while the rest of us suffer.
And also to punk rock for teaching us about community and also about the delicate art form of not giving a fuck and giving a fuck at the same time. And in the current state of the world, where wars are happening, injustices are happening, where climate is being ignored and reaching a tipping point, where people are threatening our sovereignty as a nation, and make no mistake about it, those threats are real. It's time for us to set aside our differences, to drop the anger and divisiveness that has been created to pit us against each other. We need more love, more compassion, and more understanding. We need to remember what it means to be Canadian, to recognize and respect our Indigenous communities, and to remember that whatever your religious or political views are, that we are all bound together by this beautiful and interconnected tapestry called Canada, and that our differences are what make us stronger.
And he said it so beautifully and like so powerfully, and it just really stuck out to me as a reminder, right, of the unlikely allies we have out there, because we might make assumptions that if you have an R next to your name or a D next to your name, what have you, that you have a certain position. And I just don't think we ever want to make those assumptions. I know I don't make those assumptions. Like,
Yeah.
I will have an open heart in all contexts because I do believe people can evolve, and I do believe that they won't evolve if you shut the door on them.
Yeah.
And, creating spaces for dialogue and conversations just it's only it's one of to your point about door knocking and canvassing, it's the only way out of this is like
100%.
and so
Yes.
when I see Republican members of Congress that are lobbying their peers against congressional redistricting, it tells me, okay, well, we got to like activate some more of those Republican based voters against this too. Because they also hypothetically should have some concerns. But the challenge with this issue, to go back on script, is a lot of people don't understand redistricting. It's just so
Right.
wonky. It's so complicated. It's so dry. There's just a lot going on.
Everyone's
So,
busy and you do such a incredible job of this, and it takes a lot of work to bring government to people versus, government just being just there and people having to go seek out information, right?
right,
Because this stuff, to your point, it's wonky and like complicated. It doesn't feel like the most urgent thing to somebody. How would they even know where to look for this information? Like, you got
right.
to bring government to people. In that spirit, what are ways that people can get involved on this piece? You mentioned April 20th, potential special session. What are ways that folks can get involved to help stop this gerrymandering?
Definitely talk about it because based on recent polling from Common Cause, an overwhelming majority of voters in Florida, 76%, support independent commission made up of citizens to draw a district line, which means they do not support lawmakers drawing their own lines.
And to your
And
point, like that's a bipartisan poll. Like that's all Floridians, regardless of their political
correct.
affiliation. 100%. Yeah.
You got it. You got it. And there's also bipartisan opposition to mid-decade redistricting. And also, majority of Floridians support Congress banning maps that favor one political party over the other. And that does include majorities of Donald Trump voters and voters who identify as Republican. So I think talking about it to raise awareness is really important. If you have capacity to contact your lawmakers and ask non-political friends to also do the same to expand the base of interest and concern to go beyond our spheres of influence and support organizations that are doing this work, like Common Cause, like Equal Ground, like Legal and Voters, All Voting Matters. There's a lot of great organizations out there that are engaging in this work that you can get plugged into. And save the date for April 20th, because if that special session does happen, we're going to need folks at the Capitol, on the ground in
Yeah.
Tallahassee, ready to go. So if you
Right.
have that flexibility, please do so.
That's so great, Anna. And as you were so beautifully saying, I mean, you and I have more in common with our Republican neighbor than either one of us, like than us or that neighbor have with Jeff Bezos. Like, it's like we have so much
Yeah.
shared destiny, values, ideas, dreams, and we just are in this system that has allowed us to be so deeply divided based on lines drawn by folks who have an incentive in us being divided. And not to get too much into it, but I'll just note this. And you and I were both listening to on one of the drives back from Tallahassee on NPR. I forget the reporter's name, but it was this reporter who investigates the ultra wealthy, and they were diving into the Epstein files. And remember, they were really
Oh, that's
talking
right.
about like within the Epstein class, like you have folks of all ideologies and like you have the Steve Bannons and like these, left wing like icons that are they are just together keeping each other rich and wealthy and exploiting young girls and like
I mean,
they
and
look out for each
protecting,
other.
yes,
Like,
protecting one another. Like
exactly.
that is such like that was like that takeaway really hit me hard of like preserving their power and preserving their wealth, even when that includes like serious crimes and causing
Yeah.
just like unrepairable harm, in this case to girls and young women. And like they're all willing to turn a blind eye to it, even if they, because some will say they never saw anything, whatever. But you all saw the facts that he was accused of these crimes.
100%. Yes.
And
Yes.
that still didn't deter you from calling him a friend and checking in on him, right? And so literally protecting themselves by protecting this terrible, terrible man. And yet, like on the ground, like we are so quick to attack one another and judge one another. And yet, to your point, like there's so much more that we have in common with an everyday working person, regardless of who they voted for. And yeah, it's like, it's crazy. They have exploited that for their own benefit. And then they, while they are united at the very top, they weaponize and divide us at the
I mean,
bottom. I mean,
they recognize the power of solidarity and the power of dividing and conquering, right? And so that Epstein class has really demonstrated that in practice, and the emails and everything really have exposed this. And so to me, it's also a reminder of how powerful solidarity is. That does not mean sacrificing our values or our communities. That means actually double downing on it, because we also know that the average person wants an authentic candidate who they know where you stand and they know your issues, even if they disagree with you. They trust you, right? They know you're making the best decision based on like who you are as a human being. They know you. And so just how essential
yeah,
that is, and how
right.
I think that reflects in these special elections, and it reflects in opening and redistricting. And so there's a lot of pieces here. But I think it's all connected to a sense of like how we can win. And there is a blueprint, and we just got to get more and more people aligned on it and executing it.
Yeah, for sure. And I also think it's worth noting that we hold ourselves accountable to a much higher standard than you know, the status quo does either. Like when someone does something wrong in our spaces, there's like a clear path for accountability, right?
So
Like,
true. Yes.
so
Very,
anyways, yeah.
very well said. Very, very well said.
Uh, well, I wanted to, if we can, get a wrap up, but there's a few last items we wanted to uplift. And of course, in the healthcare silo, a lot we can talk about, but I think it's worth noting that we were able this legislative session to pass in a bipartisan manner the gap funding for ADAP, and ADAP is the AIDS Drug Assistance Program. It provides financial support to 12,000 people in Florida that are HIV/AIDS positive and need access to life-saving medication that they cannot afford without ADAP. We were able to pass legislation for bridge gap funding, and the governor signed this into law. Huge shout out to Michael Rayner as an incredible advocate from Broward who came to Tallahassee and led
Yes.
the charge on this, and so many others as well. But I wanted to uplift it because it's not it's a win, but there's a larger fight ahead for the state budget to make sure that the 26 to 27 annual budget also provides funding. So I wanted to uplift that point.
So the governor announced the redistricting special session on April 20th. So that is still standing, but the legislature has not announced a budgeting special session yet. That's where we currently stand at right now.
Yeah, correct.
Cool.
And honestly, after these election results on Tuesday, I like to think Republicans are being a little bit scared about doing congressional redistricting because voters don't seem to be interested in anything that they're selling based on those special election results. But we'll see what happens in the days ahead. And just as like a reminder for folks, now that we're back in district, we're hosting more town halls and community gatherings, and so we do have our virtual legislative session review coming up. We'll do in-person reviews in the months ahead. But we did host our first post-session town hall was focused on colorectal cancer awareness, which is March. So definitely want to emphasize that for folks to make sure that you are following the recommendations on when to get your colonoscopy. Our mom passed away to colon cancer when we were 13 years old. I wanted to amplify the importance of making sure you are listening to your doctor, but also getting recommendations. Now the age to get scoped is 45. Unless you have cancer in your family, then you got to do it sooner. But want to make sure we at least amplify that to save some lives and remind folks that there are no symptoms to the beginning stages of colon cancer, really. And so that's why getting a colonoscopy is the best way to find out if you're okay.
Oh, Anna, my friend who's a nurse was so excited that this was your first town hall. She was like, "Everyone get your booty checked." Like, so it's also so important to, as you do, to destigmatize all health and illness issues, right? But in particular, I think like colonoscopies and colon for our mom, she's so embarrassed by so much of it, right? We should
Yeah.
not be embarrassed about keeping ourselves healthy and safe. And so really think it's so beautiful how you made that one of your first pieces, marking the month also, and just planning that while also being the midst of session, all the things, right? And I was not able to make the town hall, but I will say I took a friend to get his colonoscopy this week. So in my small way, I hope to have helped make a difference. And I take a lot of friends to get their colonoscopies. I'm kind of that girl now. So
That's great.
I got a whole routine. And I think someone in the office thought it was you because they kept making eyes at me. And I was like, I'm just eating my grapes, eating my peanut butter jelly, like trying not
That's
to
funny.
like
Well,
trying not
and
to bring attention to myself.
one reason why I wanted to bring up the town hall for our podcast is that despite like all the efforts that our team and myself put into making this event happen, and we worked with Avid Health, we worked with Dr. Gade, who's like one of the best in this field, and he's a leader in the gastro world, and we had amazing providers that spoke, like Dr. Galante, who's a surgeon. We had 0 reporters come to the event, 0 press, 0 coverage. And obviously we don't do these things to get press coverage, but for an issue like colorectal cancer,
It needs
it's definitely
awareness.
helpful.
It can save lives, literally.
Right. And this, again, like not to continue on this point, but like it is frustrating because when we host events and bring people together around topics that are not super partisan, that are important, that have huge value, we get no press attention. So that's a reminder for folks that like just because you don't see it doesn't mean it didn't happen. So just always like ask and check, right? Whatever the topic is, because like there are Democrats, myself included, who are doing a lot in all the ways, like delivering constituent services, uplifting public health issues, fighting the good fight, on policy and in the local and national stage. But you don't always get to see it because there might not be any coverage, or might not be in your feed. So just being mindful of the realities of the algorithms we're navigating in, where like we are literally being segmented what information we get or don't get to feed a bias. And we cannot fall victim to that. But that's why we're glad you're here with us on our podcast, because we get to talk about all this and more. And if you're listening to this podcast, that's because you've chosen, you made a choice to say,
yeah,
I want to listen to these 2 girls. And so we love that because like
we're so grateful.
we're smashing the algorithm right here, right? Like by you choosing to listen to us, regardless of your political ideology or your background or your interests, what have you, like you decided to spend your, 45 some minutes with us. We appreciate you for that.
Yes, we do. Yeah. Well, and on that, I think it might be a good time to wrap up. We did want to give some love to one of our listeners, Cameron, who shared as a fellow Orlandan with a background in communications and journalism. Okay. Twinning with Anna and Ida is exactly the kind of podcast I've been looking for. The way that they break down complex, timely topics from the federal level all the way down to state and local issues is incredibly thoughtful and refreshing. And so we just want to thank Cameron and all of our listeners for tuning in with us on this 11th episode. We are so grateful for y'all being on this ride with us because it's a little chaotic, but we wouldn't have it any other way. Thank you all for being a part of this with us, and we will see you soon.
Hi, y'all.
And we'll close with this. There's a line from the great Ian MacKaye of Minor Threat and Fugazi that has been stuck in my head since first learning of this award. You tell me that I make no difference. Well, at least I'm fucking trying. What the fuck have you done? We believe that people are innately good and genuinely want to help, and sometimes they just need some inertia or a spark to help get them there. And you can be that spark, and you can be that hero that walks among us.